Hello, my name is Max Banfield. Welcome to my talk. This is talk 4 in my series of talks on the coronavirus COVID-19. And I will be discussing the breathing problem. In order to do that, I'll just briefly summarise my first 3 talks, which explain how breathing occurs and what its purpose is, and then it will be clearer as to what the virus does to interfere with that process. When a person breathes in through their mouth and nose, the air goes to a section of the back of their throat called the pharynx, and then it goes down into the larynx, which is just a continuation of that hollow air tube, and it further continues into the trachea, and collectively they're called the windpipe. When it reaches the chest, just before getting to the heart, it branches off into 2 branches, and they go to the left and right lungs. The right lung has 3 lobes and the left lung has 2 lobes, and they each have a bronchial tree where the tube divides into smaller and smaller hollow tubes until they reach the end where there is a structure that is similar to a bunch of grapes, and those grape-like structures are the air sacs, and they're called the alveoli, and there are millions of them in the lungs. The surrounding surfaces of those air sacs is very thin, made up of only 1 layer of cells. And when the air, which is breathed in, it contains 21% of it is oxygen. And that oxygen can pass through the gaps between those cells. And the air sacs are surrounded by very fine blood vessels called capillaries that are thinner than a human hair. And the oxygen passes through the walls of those vessels and into the liquid and of the blood and into the red blood cells. And then that blood is essentially oxygenated. And then those blood vessels lead back to the heart, and then the heart pumps the oxygenated blood around the body. The heart pumps it out into a large vessel called the aorta, and then down to smaller arteries called the abdominal arteries, and then down to the leg arteries, and then down to smaller arteries called arterioles, and then down to the toes, where it enters very fine blood vessels, again the capillaries with the thin walls. Now, when the blood comes out of the heart, it also goes to the liver and the kidneys and so forth, but I'm just explaining one lot that goes down to the toes. Because it comes out from the heart into a large aorta and then into smaller arteries and arterioles, the blood pressure increases, so that by the time it gets to the capillaries, the oxygen, the protein and the liquid that's in it gets pushed out of those very fine blood vessels into the surrounding area or outside of them. And the oxygen goes into human cells to provide energy, and in the process it produces carbon dioxide. Now, when some of the liquid comes outside of those blood vessels, it enters the lymphatic system and it is dispersed in that manner. Because the liquid has passed out of those very fine blood vessels, the blood pressure drops. And the carbon dioxide, which is formed outside of those vessels, is drawn in. And so the blood which leaves has carbon dioxide in it, and it goes out through small veins called venules, out through the venous system, and then larger veins, the leg veins, and then the abdominal veins, and then the vena cava and back to the heart. So the blood containing carbon dioxide then gets pumped back into the lungs and into smaller and smaller vessels until it gets into the capillaries again, the very fine blood vessels, and the carbon dioxide moves out of the capillaries and into the air sacs. It then goes up through the bronchial tree in the lungs, and then up through the windpipe and out the mouth. So, as a brief summary, you breathe in air that contains oxygen, and it goes through your body and provides oxygen to the parts of the body that need it. As it becomes carbon dioxide because of the reaction that produces energy, and you breathe out carbon dioxide. So how does the coronavirus interfere with that process and cause problems? Well, that's what I'm going to discuss now. This is a rough diagram of a virus. It is surrounded by spikes that are similar to these spikes on a crown, a king or a queen's crown, and hence it's called the coronavirus, from the word corona, which means crown, from the Latin word corona. And you may be familiar with the term coronation, when a king or queen gets crowned. Well, that's where it gets the name coronavirus from, the spikes on the outside. So the virus has undergone a number of mutations, which makes it different to other viruses in several ways that enables it to cause problems. This particular virus can attach itself to ACE2 receptors on a human cell in the air sacs. When it is attached, it then draws itself into the human cell. And whilst the virus is on the outside of the body, it's harmless and it just disintegrates. When it gets inside the human body, if it gets into a human cell, it can use the reproductive unit of the human cell to multiply itself over and over again, until such time, there's so many of them, that the human cell explodes. And the net consequences of that are that the human cell dies, and then the immune system recognises it as a foreign body and sends in macrophages to attack it and destroy it. That's a macrophage, derived from the word macro, large, and phage, to eat. So it starts to attack the virus. Now, there are a number of symptoms that the COVID virus causes, such as maybe a sore throat and so forth, but it can also cause a fever, an elevated body temperature, and it can also cause inflammation. And the inflammation basically means it produces liquid. You may be familiar with footballers who injure their knee and the knee swells up, and that's because the knee fills with liquid. Well, in this instance, the air sacs in the lungs begin to fill with liquid. Now, the result is that the air you breathe in, which has 21% oxygen, gets down to the air, but it has difficulty getting through the liquid to the blood vessels. In other words, the oxygen in it can't get into the blood vessels. So you end up with what's called hypoxemia, or low oxygen levels in the blood. And all your vital organs need that oxygen. So it creates problems. But it also can cause a symptom of breathing difficulty, which is called Acute Respiratory Distress Syndrome, which is abbreviated as ARDS. Now, you may have a test that indicates you've got the virus. You may have symptoms. They may be mild. You may have been to a doctor. But if you get this breathing problem and the distress associated with it, you'll possibly be sent to a hospital. And the hospital will do various tests. It would include a CAT scan, and that's the CAT scan sends X-rays through your lungs, and where there's liquid, it partially obstructs those X-rays, and it will leave a white patchy image on the CAT scan. The results of those tests will determine what happens next, and if your oxygen levels in your blood are low, they will provide you with an oxygen mask. And where air is only 21% oxygen and not enough of that oxygen is getting through the fluid to the blood, the oxygen mask will put oxygen through to try and overcome that problem by getting more oxygen through to the blood. And if that's there's still problems, or problems come later, then they may put you on a ventilator. Now, a ventilator is a mechanical air pump, and it will pump air into your lungs to overcome that obstruction as well. And because people breathe in and out, some can't tolerate the intrusion or the influx of that air. They may be put under sedation and essentially put to sleep, so they don't feel the pain, and they're not aware of the air pump, and they're not resisting it. So that's what happens in hospital. And the purpose is to keep oxygen getting into your body for as long as possible, so that your immune system can develop the capacity to overcome the virus. And the other method, of course, of lowering the incidence is various prevention methods which are being promoted, and I'll be discussing those in my next talk. So I hope that explains what's going on in a manner that's understandable, and thank you for watching.